the situation itself is not that toxic. It's the reaction to the situation that becomes the toxicity. And if we can, in a very mature and even systemized, objective way, address these scenarios as they emerge, but then systemize how the rest of the team is doing it.
Hello there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Orthopreneurs podcast. Today, we are, I think, lucky enough to have somebody I really respect a ton and who I've had a chance to get to know a little bit better. And so let's all welcome Dr. John Pobanz. John, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here. Thanks, Glenn.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. And I'll just start off right now and say the day I asked you if you would speak at Orthopreneurs Summit in Orlando this year, and you said yes. I'm thrilled when everybody says yes and they're willing to follow the vision, but you were special for me, John. And so I'm so thrilled that we're going to have you there.
Well, it's an exciting thing. I love attending the event, and being invited is a big honor. Thank you very much.
Well, the honor is all ours, but thank you. And you're going to be speaking on lessons in leadership, I think is what the title of your talk is going to be, correct? And I think we're going to get more into that in just a little bit, but it's lessons in leadership?
Yeah, that's right. I've had a lot of really wonderful examples in leadership throughout my life, in church scenarios, in work scenarios, and then, of course, practice for the last 25 years. So I've weathered a lot of mistakes mostly, and as just a lifetime student of leadership, I'd like to talk about it.
That'd be great. And I already have a preview a little bit of what you're going to talk about, so it's great. But we'll have a lot of great questions and back and forth. And again, as I told you before we sort of came on, you're one of those folks who I really haven't gotten a chance to know very well, but your reputation in orthodontics for years is beyond reproach. You're known as a really progressive thinker, a very measured thinker, somebody that I know a lot of people really respect. And for folks listening, if you don't know who John Pobanz is, you should get to know him. Come to Summit, of course, if you're not coming to Summit. And if you're not coming to Summit, you should go now to opsummit2023.com and sign up. And as much as it'll be great for you to meet John, there's some really other amazing people you want to meet as well. But let's start off here. Give us that sort of 30,000 foot view of how did you end up where you are right now? Give us as much or as little as you want about your story, because I know I'll find it interesting.
Well, I grew up in Ogden, Utah, and had orthodontics as a kid and just thought my orthodontist was a rock star. I think a lot of us end up gravitating towards dentistry because of our first relationship with our orthodontist. That's a real common story. I even hear that from residents at Roseman, where I do some volunteer teaching. And it was no different for me. Along the way, was at Utah State here, a proud Aggie, and then made my way to Nebraska, to the Midwest, where I did both my dental training and my orthodontic training. And throughout the whole process then of getting into a practice and purchasing it, I came up against struggle, just knowing how to interact when there's a bump, right? A patient that had a concern or a team member that had a concern. And I'm really fortunate in that my father is a mental health specialist, social worker, and now I'm married to a psychologist. So I've had all these amazing behavioral science people in my life that me as a clinician and just love to move teeth and create smiles and study bone biology and do TADs and all that stuff I've kind of lectured and written about. Yeah, I can deliver that, but then being able to communicate effectively when there's something that didn't go well, that's always been something that I've sought coaching for by people close to me in my life, particularly my father. And so you asked, how did I get to here today to where I'm invited to give a podcast or be involved in a podcast? Part of it revolves around just my ongoing study of how to manage and approach conflict. So that's kind of the, high level view of why we're having this conversation today.
Yeah, it's great. And, you and I joked a little bit before, for those of you out there who've heard me say it before, we just don't say, okay, I'll meet you at 3:00 on Zoom. Let's go do a podcast. We sit, we talk a little bit ahead of time, find out some of the areas of interest of the potential for the speaker and what have you. And, the one thing that John and I have in common is we're essentially exactly the same age. Yeah. And I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today, and this is no offense, and I'd love your feedback on this. There's no offense intended to anybody who's younger, right? Who's 35 or 40 years old, or even early 40s. You and I won't speak for you, but I'm about to enter my late 50s, okay? Let's call it mid 50s right now. But, sure. But I think that there's something that happens as you age right? We're on the sunset of our lives. At least that's how I view it. We're not on the sunrise anymore. 110 is a pretty good ripe age to live to if you're going to live 50-50, right? And I think there's something on the sunset of our lives that allows you to mellow a little bit. It allows you to take better perspective. You've learned a lot of lessons. You've been kicked around a fair amount of times and picked yourself up and learned what you can and can't handle very easily. And I think it gives you a confidence to be able to approach situations from a perspective of not necessarily having to be right, but just, you know what, I'm just too tired to fight this. Let's figure out how do we get through this in a fair, amicable way. What are your thoughts on that? Is just age playing a role in this stuff?
It's a huge factor. When I look at ways that I would respond to difficult situations I got out of school at 28 years old. It was kind of a fast track story. And probably those first 4 or 5 years, I just made tremendous and mostly because I was embroiled in emotion. Something would come at me and I'd overreact to it, and I would kind of get pulled onto the stage of drama that was being created either by the complaining parent or the scrutinizing dentist or the team member that probably just needed an opportunity to be coached. And instead, I got pulled onto that stage of drama. Well, now, after weathering tons of years of that and navigating it with what a lot of people call the wine to shine, the 5 steps of conflict resolution, I can find myself calmly and objectively stepping off of that stage of drama, and having some years of wisdom helps me to approach it like my dad would. He's 87 and probably the wisest, most noble hero ever had in my life, right? And if I've watched him do that in the family, I've watched him do that as a professional, and I try to emulate that now. And it's a lot easier for me at 54 to objectively not allow emotion to pull me into drama.
And it's hard. I mean, we all learned when we were younger, the old saying, you can be right or you can have peace, right? Like I tell the story many times about when I was younger, probably about 30 something, 32, 33 years old is my best guess. Mm-hmm. I just remember that I had a patient, I was a restorative doc at the time, and I'd done a filling and it was beautiful. I mean, I'm not tooting my horn. It was more than clinically acceptable. And it was beautiful. Yeah. And the patient had called all belligerent and angry about the fact that she wanted her money back because she was still sensitive to cold. This was old school amalgam, right? And I tried to calm her and she wouldn't listen. And I called my attorney because remember back then, what people won't think about today was the National Practitioner Data Bank, right? And if you had a request from a patient for a refund in writing, you'd have to put it through the data bank. And those days, thankfully, are long gone. But I was concerned about it escalating to where she'd give me written notice and then I'd have to report it. And it was a big deal. So I called my attorney and I said, I don't want to give this woman her money back. It's like $200. It's BS. And I remember that my attorney said to me at that point, would it be worth $200 to never think about this ever again, like the rest of your life?
Yes.
And I was like, he's like, I could bill you. We could fight her. I could write her a letter and you'll pay more money. He said, just pay her the $200 and smile and move on and never think about her again. And that's what you're saying.
Yeah, that's really true. There's been so many situations where I wish I would have just stepped back and said, what is the true cost benefit of my reaction? And really, that's how a lot of these situations play out. The situation itself is not that toxic. It's the reaction to the situation that becomes the toxicity. And if we can, in a very mature and even systemized, objective way, address these scenarios as they emerge, but then systemize how the rest of the team is doing it, all right? That they're representing the same careful, methodical approach of using those 5 steps, restating whatever's going on, showing empathy, creating a solution, probing to see if the recipient of the communication is accepting the solution, and then creating an amazing overkill of effort after the fact to make sure it doesn't reoccur. That's how we interact with patient families, right? As teams. Right. I know that the Smile Doctors organization has even adopted that as part of their mantra, the wine to shine. Scott
Wine to shine. We all talk about it all the time.
Amazing role plays, right? Now that all came about from some articles that I wrote clear back in 2010 and did some study club interaction. It turned into an AAO presentation in 2015. And now we got a chance to kind of revisit it here at the summit. So I'm excited that that's the case. And I think it'll give a lot of people, all these new young grads that have graduated since that amount of time, 8 years since it's really been a front topic. It'll help them because they're right in the thick of the struggle as young clinicians and practice owners.
Oh, yeah. And, you've been practicing. When did you graduate your ortho program? What year?
98.
So you've been
25 years.
Yeah, you've been doing a quarter of a century, which makes it
Yeah.
sound really cool. I don't know why I have gray hair and you don't.
It's there.
Yeah. Okay.
It's there. And I don't have my beard. My beard is whiter than your beard.
Okay. Well, mine's getting white by the day.
Yeah.
But again, relative to that, you've been practicing 25 years. I would be curious to ask you, because I have my own feelings I'll weigh in on afterwards. I came out of school in 92 from dental school and went right into practice. I feel, let me not tell you what I feel. Do you feel that the landscape of the patient-doctor interaction and the stress levels has changed in 25 years? Do you feel like patients are more sort of hair trigger-esque, ready to start a fight easier today, or less so than when we got out of school in the 90s?
I think it's definitely elevated for sure. I think the population at large has a much more critical stance to caregivers and care providers. And it's partly because they have a voice, right? They can go on Google or any other review site and make statements, true or false, about us. And we really are now forced to take a real calm approach to how we interact when these struggles emerge, right? Because it could hit our Google page in an hour if we blow it. But that shouldn't also make us scared. I think at the same time, we can boldly represent our position and do it in a professional way, but just feel more equipped, if we study and help each other, know how to manage it, those situations better.
Yeah, well said. I feel like I'm setting myself up for a bunch of okay boomer responses in just a second.
Yeah.
But I really do think that, when I came out of school, out of dentistry, when I came out of dental school, I was 24 years old, started doing dentistry in New York. And New York is, traditionally known as a spot where people are pretty aggressive, willing to get into conflicts pretty easily. I got to tell you, back in the day when there was no cell phone, right? Which there was a time, folks, when I treated patients and there were no cell phones in everybody's hand. The phone you had was the one attached to your car. It was in your car and there was an antenna on the back, and that's how you used the cell phone, right? And they'd sit in a chair and they'd either read a magazine or a book or whatever it was, and we would talk. And there were conversations. And granted, when you're a restorative dentist, the conversations are much longer than when you're in ortho, because you're at the chair for 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Whereas restorative, I could have a 5-hour appointment with somebody. But I feel like back then, people had more humanity. There was more understanding of the conflict that the person in the other shoes was going through. And I know it's easy to look back and everything looks, rosy in hindsight, but I really do think that for those graduating residency programs now and coming out into new practice, I do think they're facing a landscape, like you said, where I think people are more hostile. I think people are coming in triggered. They're ready. Like, their kid is screaming at them, or they've gotten 50 emails that they're angry about. They just got a text. The thing that they used on their phone wasn't working right to try to pick up their dry cleaning or whatever it might be. Or, there's just pressure. They're getting 5 emails from the PTO about this new event that's going on. And I feel like they're so stressed that it's almost a blessing if we can wind to shine, if we can take these people and allow them to know that maybe the rest of their life is crazy, but when they talk to us, at least we're going to hear them. Does that sound crazy, John, or do you agree with that?
No, I agree completely. The key is being equipped with practice and study to transform the anger. And the same people that are really vocal and maybe really quick to be triggered can also be transformed into raving fans. And those outspoken people have followers, right? They have people that they influence, people that they have an effect on. And if you can take that moment that seems like an absolute burden, it's even scary, and then change your mindset and say, hey, this isn't a burden right now. This is an opportunity.
Yeah.
And not only is it an opportunity, but I'm really equipped to take this anger and transform it into a shine, into a complaint to a compliment, you'll probably find that these are the folks that then turn gears and become your 5-star reviewer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Again, I think that, the interesting thing is, and again, this is just my own sort of hypothesis, is that when there's one emotion out really hard, it's like the dial on a clock, right? And if you go far enough around, with emotion, you can transition to another emotion where 11:59 and 12:01 on the clock are the two closest points on a clock, right? Other than, you're talking one day to the next. They're as far apart as you can be as far as a day goes, but they can be really close to one another. 12 o'clock in 1 second and 11:59 and 59 seconds on a clock are two different days, but they're right there. One could be anger and one could be, happiness. And I feel like when you have somebody who's really triggered, really angry, and I mean, how many times in your career have you had somebody who came in pissed off, angry, not a toxic, crazy person? That's another animal altogether, right? But someone who's a good person who's just pissed off. They got a bill in the mail from your office. Their husband said to them, "What is this about?" Or their wife said to them, "What is this about?" And they got into an argument with their husband or their wife, and they were given an ultimatum: "You better go solve this." Right. And they're sent out with marching orders, and they come into your office, and they're dealing with all this emotion from home because the husband or wife doesn't know that you've been working on the kid for 18 months. They just wrote a check and now they're pissed off. And so they come in ready to fight, and you're there for them, and you sort of help them along on the journey. How many times has somebody come in and been a real jerk, and by the time they leave, they apologize to you and they say, "Hey, by the way, I got to tell you, I'm so sorry. I got a lot on my plate." Right? Have you heard that hundreds of times in your career?
Definitely. Yeah. And what's interesting is it's not just the upset parent, right? This then transcends into the team dynamic situation too, where you've got conflict on the team, and maybe there is unresolved conflict. And if you apply the principles of wine to shine in a team context, you can thrive even more, right? It isn't just about converting, somebody from almost on the brink of giving you a 1-star Google review into a 5, but it's also within the team. Okay, how do I react in a way that not just transforms anger, but inspires change? And it really starts with the finger point. Instead of saying, "Oh, who's responsible for this problem?" or "Why did so-and-so do this?" Turn and put it on yourself and ask yourself what and how questions. What can I do? How can I change the systems or the circumstances in my place of business so that this particular situation has a solution, not just now, but then down the road, that it's less likely to recur? And that's part of the lessons in leadership story for the 30-minute, summit lecture. We're going to dig deep into, at least 2 really good examples that are juicy and difficult, and say, how did we then inspire change and create clarity for the mission of the practice instead of getting caught up in the emotion of the drama of the moment and being guilty then of mismanagement and having it then escalate into a significant problem.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that your goal for that lecture is to help people understand how to basically solve conflict problems in a constructive way and how to have a happier, more stable, lower stress life. I mean, that's what it comes down to at the end of the day, because I'm guessing that the principles you're going to teach can also be translated into regular life as well.
Oh, yeah. They apply to any relationship. My father, Melvin Pobanz, my hero, right? He's the one that exemplified that within our family story and our family culture, is that, hey, if we've got a problem, let's hit it head on. Let's embrace it together. And let's view this problem, this struggle, this as an opportunity rather than a burden, because on the other side of this, we're going to be closer because of it. And so it really does transcend the doctor-parent, doctor-patient relationship, the dynamic within the team. And then these skills are helpful in your marriages and in your family also. And I don't claim to be some sort of expert. I'm just a student. And but I think I'm an orthodontic voice that can give it context within the world that we all work and live in, what we deal with day to day as practice owners.
Yeah. I can give you 2 stories really quickly of situations where one I screwed up royally, but it worked out. and the other one where I probably did it more along, I used to have two amazing people who worked in my office. Amazing. And one day at the end of the day, they march into my office, these two amazing women, they close the door behind us. And one looks at the other and goes, I cannot work with this woman anymore. And apparently every single day when the assistant would walk past the front desk would call her a very naughty word under her breath. And she would respond back under her breath on the way to go get a patient, another naughty word. And they would do it. It went on for weeks. And then finally it just came to a head. And I remember I said to them, I took the opposite of the Pobanz advice. And I said, I love both of you dearly. And I want to keep working with both of you. But if you don't solve this, it was either the morning and I said by lunch, or if you don't solve this by the time I come to work tomorrow, you're both out of a job. Probably, I mean, I'm very good at not making other people's problems my problems, but, and you sort of feel the fear and do it anyway. But now at age 55, I probably take a little bit more of a proactive approach towards explaining to them that it's in their best interest to solve this, as opposed to you go work it out and someone comes in with a black eye. But I did have once an older woman, and she was nice to my hygienist. She was nice to my team. But every time I walked in the room, she was rude. She was just nasty. Like, I don't know what it was. She was probably 75 years old, and I was probably about 30. And all she would do was just rip on me, tear me a new one. She'd raise her voice. And one day I just saw her and I said, why are you so angry at me? Like, I have to ask you, every time I come in, you're angry. And she had no idea she was doing it. And she apologized from the bottom of her heart and brought me a gift. And I was like, the gift is unnecessary. But the point of the second story is that many times people have no idea how they're emoting. They have no idea that, the stress of the doctor coming in the room triggers a response in them that they're not even aware that they're doing. Finding out that their child can't come in at 4:00 for an appointment. They may not even be aware that they're looking you in the eye and using a very hostile tone. So what would you say for any orthodontist or any team member? What would be like a hint or two or tip you'd give them now? If, they walk up to the front of the office and there's a mom or a dad or a patient who's just angry about something, right? And they're not yelling, they're not screaming, but they are most certainly not acting in a very simple, easy to solve way. Where do you start with all this? What do you do first?
Well, in that moment, it's very stressful. The heightened emotions are manageable. And so the first thing to do is just restate what their concern is. You got to know what they're talking about. And then it also buys you time to think about what your solution is going to be. So, some introductory statements. Okay, just to help me get to the bottom of what your concern is. Or another statement could be, I'm sensing you're upset, and I'd really like to understand with really perfect clarity what's happening. It sounds like, and then you restate what you think it is. And it just gives you time to look them in the eye with active listening skills. And immediately the process of restating to any audience, your wife, right, your team member, immediately creates a feeling of being heard. Because a lot of times emotion is about, hey, I refuse to be ignored right now.
Yeah.
As long as someone's paying attention and listening to me and I'm really being heard, well, I'm going to feel better immediately. So that's always the first step. According to Melvin, my dad, right? The mental health specialist, is they got to restate what's going on. You got to find out really what's bothering, because you might be wrong. You might be making assumptions that something's happening and be going down the wrong path. So that there's creating clarity, but the restate is just critical. And then immediately with empathy. Well, if I was experiencing that, I'd probably feel the same way. You're validating the emotion. People love to feel validated. That's the other process of being diffused from your anger. You're transforming the anger into an environment where then you can give a very tangible, valid solution to the audience, to the recipient of the communication. Those two steps are golden, and they work every time. They work every time if you do it correctly.
It's beautiful. You're right. And when I've gotten let's be honest, we're humans. We get upset. I was on the phone with an insurance company yesterday, and they just kept transferring me around. And I couldn't get an answer. And, I always try to remember you get more with a spoonful of honey than you do a jar full of vinegar. And so I always try to be nice and kind, but sometimes you just sort of get on that edge, and you can tell the customer service training good or bad from a company about how they handle it. And a tip I'll throw out there. I have a young lady who's a rock star, superstar. She's not a native English speaker. She comes from Mexico originally, but her ability to empathize and communicate with people is spectacular. And she ran our call center, our communication center for a while. And the one thing she didn't learn in her English skills was that there's one phrase I told her you never ever say to somebody who's upset. And I said one word: don't start it with sir or ma'am. She didn't understand that because she thought that was a sign of respect. Oh, and so if someone's angry on the phone, what do you mean you got to cancel my appointment? Dr. Krieger should be in every day. What do you mean he's out sick? You know, And she go, sir. And I'm like, oh God, that's just like, or ma'am. And she meant it because of her culture. Ma'am was like, please, I'm trying to give you respect. And I said, okay, moving forward, because we used to record the call, moving forward, I get where you're coming from. But when you say it in that context, the first thing you're doing is putting up a wall. You're immediately depersonalizing it, which is exactly the opposite of what you are recommending, which is the right way to do it. And so, folks out there, if your team members ever get upset, have somebody upset, just please tell them not to start the sentence with ma'am or sir. Because if you've ever been on the other side of that, you just want to, you're not listening to me.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, when you have a patient who's upset, right, they're at the front desk, what do you mean I can't get a 4:30 appointment? Do you pull them aside, or do you want to just calm them down right there in the reception area? There's 12 parents there, or whatever it might be. Do you want to take them aside, which on one hand will escalate it very quickly, potentially. On the other hand, it's out of earshot of everybody else, or it makes them feel special. Do you just meet it head on right there and go, hey, I'm getting a sense you're upset here, and I'd love to learn more about what's going on. Yeah. Please, are you comfortable sharing with me what's going on, or I'm hearing this? Or do you pull them aside when you say that?
To be honest, I like the first two steps to be as public as possible. I want everybody to hear that, hey, not only are we going to address this, but it's going to be met with the authority of the doctor or the director of operations. Jenny's probably better at the 5 steps than I am in my practice. But we intentionally do it so as many people can hear it. But part of the creating of the solution in the right context could mean, I've got a solution. I'd really like to talk about it over here. I want to get real specific with you, whatever it might be. You could decide in the moment, do you really want the audience that's listening in to hear that, or do you want to pull it somewhere else? But I think the first 2 steps in front of the audience are golden and really effective, because everybody hears, oh, Dr. John's got this. He's fine.
And that's why I love Dr. John. Right. And wow, look what a great guy he is. Look how he's trying to help her. Right. You're not coming at it as an argument. And I think I agree with you. I think it makes the whole reception area realize that you're a kind, compassionate, empathetic human being, as opposed to, you want to come with me and we could talk about this over here. Right. All of a sudden it looks like what are they trying to hide? And because a lot of times that's the first instinct that a lot of people have, is to walk them to the side. And all of a sudden you've taken something that might have been handled in 30 seconds of chatting. And now, what are they going to talk to me about now? We got to go private on this? Oh, I'll go private on them. How do you, and this is just a little side question here. Again, I once asked a great teacher of mine when I was doing a TMD course. And this guy was old back in 1999. Mm-hmm. He sat at a lab bench next to PK Thomas. You remember our waxing instrument?
Yeah.
The PKT 1, 2, whatever. So he sat next to PK Thomas at USC at a lab bench, and he was my ethology teacher. And so I would sit and I was already graduated, and I was taking this postgraduate course, and I was talking to him and said, how do you know this stuff about TMD? Like, you're incredible. And he said, well, you got to make a lot of mistakes. And I said, well, how did you make these mistakes? He goes, experience. You just have to have a lot of experience. And you clearly have a lot of experience. My question for you is, in that experience and with the mistakes you've probably made at times in your life, like I have, how do you know the difference between the patient you can go up to and say, hey, John, I hear you're upset about the 4:30 appointments. You know what, man? I'm a parent too, and I know what it's like, and it's difficult. And I would feel exactly the same way as you. if I was put in this position, which is exactly your empathy or restating the position and everything. How do you know when you've got a patient you can do that with versus the one who truly is irrational, right? Or do you just approach everybody the same way at the beginning, hoping that it's going to, the first 2 steps are going to solve it, as opposed to that person who just, they're going to fight with you in your office because they like fighting. They're going to fight with their dry cleaner. They're going to fight at their physicians. They're going to fight at the PTA event. They just like fighting and they like arguing. That's part one, is how can you tell the difference, or is there no way to know until you engage? And number 2 is, have you faced those cases where you couldn't calm somebody down, and what do you do?
Well, I think if you go to the 4th step, which is probe for acknowledgement of the solution, right? You met the complaint head on, you've shown sincere interest, you've made a proposal, whatever the situation is. If it's the 4:30 appointment, hey, why don't we find a time where we can meet the need for the family member right now, but let's schedule 2 appointments out in the future for times, but realize that those 4:30 appointments are hard for everybody, and everybody wants them, and we might be able to do some things at 4:30 and not at 4:30. That's the proposal. And then you probe and you say, okay, now that we've talked about this, how do you feel about it? The erratic or rational person is probably going to show themselves right there.
You never told me when I started orthodontics that I couldn't get 4:30 appointments. Like, we've all had that, right? We've had that.
Yes.
I just want to crawl under the table right now. I'm literally getting a visceral reaction, and my sympathetic nervous system is like, I can feel my skin tingling when I talk about it, because they're so irrational at that point, right?
Yeah. The most rational people will diffuse with the first 4 steps or the first 3 steps. And at that point, like you talked about, they start to become apologetic. They start to want to build the relationship. You got to remember, most people bring a complaint because they want the relationship to continue. They don't want it to end, at least rational people.
Right.
Now, if you talk to my wife, who's a psychologist, she'll say, you got to remember that a certain percentage of the population have significant mental health problems. And it doesn't matter what solution you provide, they may or may not accept it. And under that circumstance, which is not very often, but it has happened to me, the solution might be for the treatment relationship to end. It might be, as much as I'd love to continue, it just doesn't feel like this is going to be healthy or productive for either one of us. And we probably need to think about a new scenario for the rendering of treatment for your family member. And here's some suggestions. And then you got a new pathway to go. And that same person might be better off without treatment. They might be better off in somebody else's umbrella. And that's a valid solution in the 5 steps, is that the relationships end. And that transcends also to the team relationships. It's okay to come to the conclusion that somebody needs to leave. But you need to create a pathway for them part, whether it be the patient or whether it be the unhappy parent. How can we create exit in a dignified way?
Yeah.
And a lot of ways to do that.
Yeah. And it's always easier to solve that one by spotting it at the beginning, right? Like that. And that's an experience thing. I think you come out of residency or you come out of dental school, I'll take all comers, right? You're going to come at me, I'll still treat you. And then you start to realize, after you've treated enough of them, that it's not worth it. And I had a very wise, sage, old, sagacious dentist say to me once, he said, I always look them in the eye and tell them, I'd rather let you down now than disappoint you later. And I've used that term so many times, and they look bewildered at that point. I say, hey, you know what? Just like you have a choice in choosing your provider because you want a good fit, I have the choice of choosing my patients because it's not a good fit. And yes, younger doctors, that's a ballsy comment to make. And it does take some intestinal fortitude and a little bit of tightening of the sphincter to get that out. But trust me, as again, another wise doctor once said, you will never, ever regret the cases you chose not to treat. You will never, ever wake up in the middle of the night and go, oh my God, I wish I treated that case. Right, John?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's very, very true. And that's definitely emerged as a new skill for me, probably in the last 10 years, is that there's certain situations that probably are better handled in a different practice. And not to lament that, but then think about the hundreds of patients that graciously receive the efforts that we provide, that are complimentary, that are kind, and everybody celebrates and wins when it comes to closure. dwell on those things rather than getting hung up on the one or two incidents that are really far and few between, that just aren't meant to happen.
Yeah. And as we wrap this up, and I appreciate your time here today, I'll just say a lot of the audience listening right now are orthodontists. We know there's a lot of non-orthodontists who listen to this, but there's a large part of orthodontists who are high achievers in their lives. And we tend to focus on what we didn't do right rather than what we did right. And raise your hand out there, folks, if you went to sleep one night thinking about the negative thing that happened and not the 9,900 positive things that you accomplished, the 5D bonds you did that day that looked gorgeous, that the patients hugged you and thanked you and you changed their lives within whatever way you did. But no, instead you're thinking about that one patient who made that one snide remark that bothered you the rest of the day, or that one case you couldn't get to go right. And from a completely different conversation we could have about mental health. Just folks, let it go. Just don't let it stick with you. Compartmentalize it, analyze it, learn from it, and then throw it away, folks. Because you agree with that?
Absolutely. We both like Tony Horton, right?
Yeah. Tony Horton. Are you a Tony Horton fan? I didn't know that you liked.
He says best and forget the rest, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That's
right. Do your best. And you remember he goes, "Do your best," and he points at them. Forget your rest. You see, folks, I got him trained. If you're not a P90X fan out there, folks, you won't get it. But again, as John and I joke, men of a certain age who remember certain things. Sure. And so I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, John, for being here today. I want to say thank you for being a part of the summit. I hope that everybody out there who's listening, who's an orthodontist, is coming, as well as with their team members. At the time of this recording, we have like 1,060 people staying in the hotel at this point. And there's not much left. So please, if there's still room, go to opsummit2023.com and sign up for yourself, for your team. I promise you, if you come to this meeting, you're going to be blown away with the kind of conversations that we're going to be having related to practice, related to leadership, related to management, related to life, to help everybody lead their most profitable, best, low-stress life. And so thank you, John, for the contribution you've been making to the profession for decades and for being a part of the Orthopreneurs Summit. It means the world to me.
Well, I'm excited to participate, Glenn. Thanks a lot for doing this podcast with me. It was a lot of fun.
We've got several stressors in our life. We've got a great profession, but we've got to deal with overhead. We've got to deal with productivity. We got to deal with team members that are outside of our control sometimes. And the great news is all of these issues are addressed in depth in this year's curriculum at Orthopreneurs Summit. So please go to opsummit2023.com, sign up for the meeting that's almost sold out, that everybody's going to be talking about, that you really need to be at to be your best practice with the lowest stress and highest profitability. opsummit2023.com. Please join me there so that I can take care of you even better than you take care of your patients.